I want to talk about the original Prey for a second. It came out in 2006. A really interesting shooter, sci-fi shooter that, well, I mean, at the time, the big selling point of the game was the fact that you were like going through these different portals and seeing a bunch of different like scalings of people. Like you were like shrinking and growing, and like enemies were shrinking and growing and things like that. And it just had some really amazing technical stuff in it, and that's kind of what they like sold the entire game on. It was really kind of the staple of the early 360 PS3 era, and really stood out to a lot of people. It got a lot of good reviews. It played well. It had a cool story. It had some interesting mechanics in it. It had some faults. The boss fights weren't like the most interesting thing ever. There was some kind of hitching with some of the gravity and things like that. Like some of the puzzles were a little hitched and jank, and you could actually lock yourself out on some situations if you weren't too careful. But other than that, it was a very interesting game. I had a lot of fun with it. You can't get the damn thing anymore. Like you pretty much have to scrape it online somewhere or find it in a bargain bin for like $1 in your local game store. Like even that's kind of hard now. It tends to go for a couple bucks on Amazon. You can like find copies that way, but they're very limited. Um, anyway, I want to talk about that game a little bit, just to kind of like set up the base here, just to kind of like explain the origin of this series, because the new game is very good. I've had a lot of fun with it so far. I've not done it yet. I've played a couple hours, but what they're doing, what I've seen so far, has been really, really impressive. They've done, they're doing a lot of the kind of song and dancey stuff that you've seen if you've already played BioShock and if you've already played Dishonored. They give you a lot of open world freedom to run around the map and like go all the way up to the ceilings on some of these levels using various guns and abilities and things like that. Lots of freedom to do everything. Multiple solutions to multiple problems. Some are kind of hackneyed. Like there are things in the game that you that have a weight limit to them and can't be lifted until you've like upgraded your strength enough to be able to lift those kind of things. But you could also just throw an explosive at them and like send those bits flying and open up a new doorway for yourself, for example, right? Or create a blockage, or like throw a lighter item at something enough until it like gets pushed out of the way, kind of thing. Like there's a ton of solutions to the kind of puzzles that the game gives you, and the opening of the game is also kind of a loop, because it kind of, it doesn't really figure out. I mean, like if you've all seen the trailers for the game and you've all seen that like it kind of takes place in space, and then you see the opening of this game and it's taking place on Earth, and you're thinking, oh, okay, cool setup, like early game setup, very you know, very System Shocky, kind of just basic, but it actually does kind of throw you for a loop a little bit, and I don't want to spoil what happens. I'm gonna cut it from the footage too, so you probably won't see that. But I'll probably show you the apartment and like the very, very, very beginning of the game and like the suit and all that kind of thing. But yeah, Prey, the new Prey, it's just a very, very solidly built game, like from the ground up. The only things I've run into it are little like graphical technical bugs on PC. I don't know if anyone's had any problem with that on the consoles. I haven't heard much other than it's like kind of unimpressive in some areas on there. It is running on CryEngine, so that is kind of dated software. I don't know if Arcane has ever had experience on the CryEngine before, so that might have had something to do with it. And I'm pretty sure as of today, which has been about 4 or 5 days since the game came out, I don't think there's been any NVIDIA drivers for the game to like kind of tweak those little graphical issues. So yeah, I've had up and down with it. I've had it on Ultra and had textures fail to load in all over the place. I've had it on medium to high, and it's been kind of fine and like relatively stable sort of thing. So in terms of the graphics and in terms of what the game is actually doing, not much to say. Like that little bit of hitching here and there, but I'm sure it'll get patched out very, very quickly. It is a looker. Like when you have it on ultra and everything, it looks very, very solid for the amount of space that you have to work around in. Um, as far as the actual shooting is concerned, the shooting feels really good. If you're familiar with Dishonored, it feels much better than that. I'm not a fan of Dishonored's gunplay at all. I think it's kind of sluggish. Even two is still kind of sluggish. Um, and it's better than Bioshock. So if you've got concerns about the kind of sluggishness from that, it's much better than that as well. It's kind of like in that in between place. Like if you've ever played, well, if you played Doom, it's kind of in between like Bioshock and Doom. Like this kind of like barely tolerable shooting compared to like this really good feeling shooting. Everything has a good impact to it and gives you good feedback and controls really well and is super accurate and all this kind of stuff. It's really good. But that's fine for the beginning points of the game because you are going to be able to upgrade your weapons as you go through it and put points into it, unlock new abilities, things like that. So I haven't gone too far in upgrading the weapons. I've only really upgraded one gun, which is the glue gun, which I'll show you footage of. The glue gun is kind of like a portal gun equivalent, honestly, for this game. Like it's just this big all utility gun that is your like go-to. At least in the early game. Like I have found some like blatantly better stuff, but nothing as like useful as the glue gun. The glue gun is how you traverse environments. It's how you like deal with the phantoms and the mimics and things like that. Like it freezes them in place and allows you to whack away at them. Um, it's a puzzle solving tool. It's got a lot of ammo in it. Like it's just a really reliable gun. And as like the literally the first gun that you get pretty much in this game, I think it's like the staple weapon of the main character. And as a staple weapon, it's pretty unique. It's pretty it stands out. It's very, very useful and practical and is going to be a go-to for pretty much every run of this game, including things like speedrunning and things like that. So it really serves multiple facets, and I'm sure you'll enjoy using it when you guys get the game. Sure, you'll have a lot of fun messing around with it, trying to figure out what kind of puzzles you can break, what kind of like walls you could clip through on it, or something like that, you know. So yeah, very good weaponry in this game. You've got your standards too, like your pistol and shotgun and stun gun and things like that. And you have to manage this stuff in your inventory. You have limited, you have a limited kind of briefcase space for everything. So keeping track of ammo, keeping track of weapons, keeping track of mods, edibles, things like that. If you're familiar with Dishonored's kind of edibles system, you've got a good idea, but compound that with the fact that you have a Resident Evil style, you know, attache case full of your goodies, and you have to upgrade that as the game goes on if you want to carry more. So yeah, there's a bit of inventory management. There is a crafting system in the game in order to craft new ammo for yourself. There's ammo everywhere, and generally it's not really a problem, but it's nice to have kind of a side option. And it's completely optional too. So if you want to just stick to like the ammo that you find in the game world, a la like a Resident Evil type experience, you can still totally have that and just ignore the crafting on the whole. The crafting really doesn't do much for you. There's like one or two necessary things that are quests that you need to use the machine for, but other than that, everything else is optional. So that's not a concern. There's some pretty unique tools in this game that you'll be using. Like, you'll find blueprints for stuff that you can make at these stations, and you can also break down a number of materials for the stations in order to, you know, build new things, build other build more materials, build replacement guns for your guns in case they get broken or get lost or you have to drop them, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a wholly optional element of the game, and some people have a bit of disdain for it. I don't see that too much. Like, I'm still kind of down with that. methodology. I'm totally fine with having that in the game and being something you have access to. I can see where people are pretty miffed at it. People are pretty sick of that kind of thing in everything, and I get that. But again, it's totally optional. You know, you never really have to touch it, so I don't find it that intrusive. And because of that, it expands the availability of the game and the playability of the game. So like, it's not a real issue. It's just something that people are gonna bother about because it bothers them. So you know. Anyway, um, moving on. Uh, the story's got a good hook to it. You go from pretty much uninterested to hooked within the first like half hour, which is good. It really throws a loop at you pretty early and keeps the kind of garbage dialogue, you know, like the fillery stuff, to a minimum. Tons of emails to pour through, a lot of the Bioshock style. So if you're really, really interested in the lore of the station and the characters and the weaponry and all that kind of thing, you can pour through that in your notes. And audio logs as well, there's all that good stuff. So you have your big lore dump if you want that. I enjoy the world, so I'll probably go back through some of that at some point, sit down with it. But as I go, I'm just kind of like I just pick things up and then skim them kind of quick and then put them away and don't really bother with it. I've kind of gotten the gist of what's going on without having to look at that stuff, so it's good that way. Not too intrusive either. It's just another kind of collectible type thing, mostly. You know, as you do in these kinds of games, something to extend the experience. Yeah, all around. Oh, let me talk about the enemies for a bit. The mimics. The mimics themselves are kind of the first enemy that you fight in the game, and they're kind of B&B, but they have a cool gimmick to them of being an enemy that can hide as anything in the game world that it can see. Now this can lead to kind of wacky things like, oh, there's a chair that's kind of just like sitting on the edge of a ledge, and you're like, oh, well, that's a mimic. But then sometimes you'll walk into a room and you'll have no idea, at least for like the first hour or two of the game, until you get the kind of scope device that you can use to spot enemies. And I haven't gone that much further in the game. I don't know how many other tools there are to kind of spot mimics or deal with them. But the first two that you get are a device that's like a lure that, like, if there's any of they're called the Typhon in this game, the main enemy. If any of the Typhon are nearby, when you throw one of these kind of lures, they'll get out of their mimic form and they'll go chase it around for a bit. So that gives you a clean opportunity to get a few whacks in on one. It's a very interesting enemy to deal with, and it kind of adds a constant element of fear as you're playing the game, because you're hesitant to go into certain rooms because what if there's a mimic in there that fucks everything up? You know, like, you might see like a really powerful enemy, and you know it's a powerful enemy, and you want to go fight it, but not at the risk of triggering like one or two mimics that are going to be chasing you around and helping it out, and that are going to run off, like skitter off and transform into something else if you don't finish them off, you know? So it's difficult to deal with until you get the scope, at least. Even when you do get the scope, like, you still have to kind of like plan around a little bit and figure out the order in which you're going to proceed and take out enemies and all that kind of good stuff. So it makes for challenging situations. And again, if you screw up, like, now they're repositioned, or now they've changed into a new form or something like that, you know? So you've got that to deal with on top of everything else. They're fun, though. They do a fair chunk of health if they actually do hit you. And they tend to, like, skitter right around your character's feet and things like that, so that can be annoying. But as far as like an enemy, yeah, it's a fairly good design. Really great idea. It keeps the game kind of fresh on multiple playthroughs. You never know what form the mimics are going to be taking when you step into a room, or like where their placement is. So yeah, I say it kind of like extends the playability a little bit. The other enemies you'll encounter are like mini robots that have flamethrowers on them, and they'll kind of like run up close and set you on fire and cause a bunch of problem that way. You have long range kind of spitter type enemies. I'm just basing this on like the first like couple hours that I've played, right? I've seen a couple that I haven't really fought. Like these kind of like, it's kind of like a spawner that spawns a bunch of these like bat-like Typhon that just swarm on you. I don't know, I haven't fought them at all. I've just kind of like seen them around. So yeah. The main Typhon, like the kind of like humanoid Typhon that you might have seen in some of the gameplay trailers, they're pretty nasty customers. They kind of blink up on you the minute that you trigger them, so you've got that to deal with. You've got kind of like these elemental ones that are weak to certain types of damage, but then are completely immune to other kinds of damage, and you got to deal with that. And most of them can do like these big long range attacks on you, energy based attacks, and can really fuck your day up, like clear your armor in like a matter of seconds. So yeah, that's kind of a good summary of like the early game things that you should expect. But yeah, it's a really great game. I've had a blast with it so far. I'm gonna keep playing it. I recommend the shit out of it. I definitely recommend it once the little technical things get solved, but until then, still a very solid experience so far. It looks like it has a very intriguing story in a very intriguing location. Lots of cool extra gameplay mechanics. Again, like the highlights so far of the first couple hours have been like the glue gun, dealing with the mimics, the outer space portions, which are very like Dead Space 3 or Adrift style, where you just keep like you have your thrusters and you boost in a direction, and then you'll just keep going in that direction and until you stop yourself. But you've got a bunch of corpses out there that you can scavenge, other alternative doorways that you can unlock as shortcuts in the station for later on. Yeah, really intriguing stuff so far. I'm gonna keep playing it. If you have preconceptions about this game being anything like the original 2006 game, it's pretty much nothing like it. The only similarities are that it takes place in space. That's pretty much it. There's no spiritual powers. It's all like technological systems shock style, like in neural mods and things like that. Yeah, it's very different kind of game. I wouldn't even call this a reimagining. I would just straight up call this. I wouldn't even call this like a reboot either. Like it's just not. It's not similar enough to even call it that. I would literally call this just a fresh product that is that got a rebrand. Like I'm sure that this game was called something else at some point, and then Bethesda stepped in and said, you know what, we have this Prey title and we're not doing anything with it. Why don't you guys use it? And just like told them to slap it on there. It really hasn't had any sort of like plot relevant, like the term hasn't had any sort of like relevance in the plot or any sort of connection or anything like that to what's going on. It's just kind of like a title that's sitting there, and I don't know, like I feel like this game must have had like a completely different title at some point. It doesn't match up. Anyway, that's my kind of take on Prey. I hope you enjoyed the footage that you saw. I hope you like this style. If you do, please give me a like and say it in the comments. Say how much you liked it, and maybe I'll do more. But that's been Prey. It's really good. You should pick it up. I'll see you next time.